You okay, Dave?
Yeah, we got it. It's full on.
Yeah.
Everybody, thank you for taking a short lunch. I think that testimony we heard this morning was worth spending the extra time on. And before we move off that subject and into the agenda for this afternoon, we need to now figure out whether we want to make a recommendation to the Appropriations Committee on spending or asking that be some money made available to the agency to distribute to the farmers who heard this morning and others who are been impacted. So I don't want to dig too much into our time because we have scheduled testimony and want to be respectful of that. But this is, and we've talked about it. I've talked about it with our guests, but we should make this have this conversation now and see what the sense is. So I'll just open it up. Representative Tupman.
So are we being asked a binary question, yes, no, support, not support, or we can go into?
Well, no, we can do whatever we think we should do.
So on that note then, I'm looking at the real issue here as a resiliency issue. Grain dependency in farming is problematic because of out of state fluctuations, because of weather patterns. It would be really wonderful if we do make this guarantee to these people who really need it, that we are able to also have some sort of plan to remedy the dependency on grains. Specifically, depending more on grazing and less on out-of-state grains.
I will say that the circumstances are what they are, and our time is limited, which first and foremost means that we're probably going to, whatever we say to appropriations, it's probably going to be more on the vague side than the specific side, and it'll serve partly as a placeholder, and there'll be time for other folks to take more testimony and, if need be, on implementing a program, as we were just discussing. Yeah, that requires some work. So,
I think we should, well, I'm just going to say for me, I'm totally in favor of supporting 9.2 million for organic dairy farmers to help them just bridge and get over the hump.
Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, I would express my personal comments in support of what Josie said. I've heard testimony this morning in the Rural Caucus, heard it all morning here. This is a one-time ask as they have proposed it, and it's retroactive through the beginning of production year 2022. And I think they're vulnerable. I'm from an industry that's never gotten a handout for anything. And I've watched my industry or profession disappear. And this is the Vermont that Jackson put on his posters, years ago. And it's what is very important that affects our tourism, our food chain, our resiliency, contributing to universal school meals. I think it's dire and it's a one-time ask, and I would certainly support that request.
Any questions, just clarifying questions about what? Yeah, John.
Is the ask definitely for the BAA and not the big budget?
Yes, that's what the request is, and I think it's largely the urgency and as we heard, one farm already this week is no longer operating, and they're concerned about that, happening between now and next budget year, whenever it would be implementable.
And if you go out in this interim, are you still eligible?
So so there are questions, those kinds of details. We can do what we can to try and answer farms that that went out, last year too. And we were just talking about that and how would we handle that. I would suggest that we, unless there's sort of a quick, easy answer, not try and answer those questions, and maybe encourage others or let others point out to others that those questions will need to be answered. Right?
Well, I would just say that perhaps there is an answer in the 9.2 number.
Right, the
Which
calculation
farms
was
are being
That
kept.
was based
Whether
on-
that was what we wanted or not,
Yeah.
that, if we're saying 9.2, then.
And just for clarification, when Maddie presented that at 8 this morning, it was for the remaining 140 farms, 139 farms, not for those that went out
Right.
previously.
I know they're talking about the remaining 139, but I don't know that 9.2 doesn't include other farms outside.
I think it's for pounds of milk shipped.
It's all based on that.
Whether or not those farms are still,
Yeah, it's regardless of that, it's about the actual milk production.
Production of 2020.
On your note, so does some of this money go to conventional farms?
No.
All right.
so the conversation so far, only talking about organic farms. And I mean, I will just say that what I understand to be the situation is that those farms have been getting a higher price, and maybe are not paying as much. In any case, their margin is not suffering the way that organic margin is. Right?
Plus, the conventional farms did get some small amount from the PCM program, margin protection program, but an organic did not get any.
The dairy margin.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think that I put in a placeholder for this $9.2 million in the BAA, and then we can figure out the rest of how they're gonna do that.
I asked the question because in our meeting with Molly Burke and Tibbetts, the head of the agricultural agency, he was very clear that both sides should get equal attention, and I don't necessarily agree with that.
Okay, yes, and I wasn't at that meeting, but I think maybe the agency's been consistent on wanting to try and be supportive of the entire sector. John?
They're under 10, but are goat and sheep, organic goat and sheep eligible?
I don't think that's part of the proposal that we heard today. I'm not sure what that would do with the numbers.
Or if that's included in that poundage.
Yeah, I feel like it isn't, but I'm not certain about that.
Do they face the same sort of pressures on each side?
I don't know what they're getting for their milk. Certainly grain wise, they must say.
We have E.B. Flora here today from the agency who's scheduled to testify. Would you like to come in and say something now, or?
The group dairies have not been in the same predicament. Most of our organic dairies, they may ship organically to a processor that's not marketing it as organic. Their price point is significantly higher. Most of them are doing specialty products like cheeses and stuff directly, and they've not had the same issue. They also don't have the same amount of feed costs because they eat significantly less. Not to say that they've not had challenges from the pandemic, but it's not been the same as on the dairy cow side of things.
I should ask you to, just for the record.
I'm sorry about that. My name is E.B. Flory. I'm the dairy section chief at the Agency of Agriculture and also the division director for food safety and consumer protection.
Just procedure-wise, do we need, for writing this letter, do we need a vote, a committee vote? Anybody know? Okay.
Might be strong.
I'm gonna suggest that we do that then. So, will the clerk, I don't know whether the clerk has the paperwork, but you can use your yellow notepad And I think we'll need, let me just state what I understand to be the motion here, and that's that we're recommending that budget adjustment, move 9.2 million to be into the Agency of Agriculture Food Markets to make available to organic dairy farmers. Then I would include the $5 per hundredweight figure, so that there's in just some framework here, so
Yes.
And the dates they're talking about too?
yeah, so the calendar year.
Retroactive payments for calendar year 2022.
Are you looking for a second for that motion?
Take a second.
Second.
Is there any more discussion? All right,
I gotta call the roll. The clerk will commence to call the roll. I forget how this is done really, but I think I'm just gonna ask people to vote. And so Representative Esme Cole,
Aye.
Representative John O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Mike Rice,
Yes.
Representative Josie Levitt,
Yes.
Representative David Templeman,
Yes.
Representative Charles Wilson, not here. Representative Henry Pearl, yes. Representative Jed Lipsky,
Yes.
Representative Rodney Graham,
Yes.
Representative David Durfee,
yes.
Representative Heather Supernant.
Yes.
The vote is 10 in favor, 1,
10-0-1.
10-0-1.
Consensus.
All right, thank you, everyone.
What exactly do you want? Do you want a letter, an email?
Yeah, I think an email's fine. Yeah.
Do you want it to say you support the provisions that were in the BAA memo that came to you?
So Mike's asking about essentially I think, the $3 million program that we talked about a little bit earlier in the week to stand up a new program to help municipal governments apply for ARPA funding. And so just to refresh everyone's memory, turns out that maybe that there's not a lot of nexus with the work that our committee actually does. And there are other committees, Commerce for one, that are digging into that a little bit more and will be also making a recommendation. We can say whatever we want or say nothing about that. And open to thoughts on that. If no one feels strongly about it, I would say we don't need to say anything.
But is this sort of House Ag's ask of the BAA?
Yes, yes.
So it's everything, it's not just a specific
I
dairy
think
one.
that depends on what you want this email to be about.
Yeah, and I think we need to, we're already a little late in getting so this is it.
This is for the 3 million.
So, right,
That's for the rural development.
right.
Right, okay.
So how do these two issues tie together? I'm sorry.
Not at all. They
Oh.
tie together only in that they are Budget Adjustment Act questions or decisions that appropriations needs to make. And in the first case, they asked us, turned out maybe they shouldn't have even asked us. And the one that we're just talking, in the other case, they didn't ask us because it's brand new information that we're presenting to them about the organic, the assistance for organic farmers.
I would propose that we just go to them with the very relevant $9.2 million to our committee and sort of leave the other alone.
Yeah.
Here.
Okay, and I'll make sure they're not wondering why we didn't say anything, but yeah.
All right, so basically I'm gonna draft an email for you to send, the chair to send, that would request from House Appropriations that $92 million be appropriated, I'm not gonna say the source, in the Budget Adjustment Act, to the Agency of Agriculture to establish a financial assistance program for organic dairy farmers to provide them from relief from economic hardship over the past calendar year at a payment of $5 per hundredweight of milk shipped by each farmer. Is that what you're looking for?
Sounds right?
Yep.
Yeah, that sounds all right.
And the past calendar year, part that's just it, okay.
I can just say calendar year 2022 if you want.
Yeah, and then before hit send on the email, double check that, for example, is the right number, the right timeframe. I'm confident in the $5, is that the right number? We heard that several times. Okay.
All right.
Good.
Okay. Great.
All right, thank you, everybody. Now, I think we are going to try and hear from several folks from the agency this afternoon with introductions to the work that they do. Thank you for your patience. And we'll be, we have until 3, break for the floor for the rest of the day. I think we'll try and get a break in the middle, a short break anyway, just to stretch. And if we're not able to hear everything and answer all questions, we know where to find these folks. We'll have them back. But Evie, do you want to lead off or?
I would be happy to.
All right, thank you.
I have a PowerPoint, so if you'll just give me a minute for it to share with you all. All right. So for the record, my name is Evie Flory. I'm the Food Safety and Consumer Protection Division Director, and also the Dairy Section Chief at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture. One of our deputy directors for our division is here, Dr. Kristen Haas, our state veterinarian. So she's here. If I can't answer something, she will, and if we can't, we'll figure something out. That's what we do. So just an overview within the Agency of Agriculture. Our food safety division is the largest division in the agency. And we kind of jokingly talk about that you never hear from us, and that's a good thing. If you hear about us, something bad is happening, there's a bad food outbreak or something like that. But our mission statement is listed there, like we want to have safe and equitable marketplaces throughout Vermont. And we also foster a lot of technical assistance with our regulations that we implement. So we do a lot of education. We like to educate before we regulate. So to kind of have like a better visual of what all we cover, we do cover from meat and poultry inspection and slaughtering to animal health, weights and measures, which weights and measures, whether you go to fill up your car with gas or one day using electricity to go into the grocery store, and the scale that you use or the scanners, that's what our team does there. We also handle maple regulations, produce, and my favorite, dairy. But our division touches every Vermonter every day, anyone traveling to our state. If you are buying something or consuming something, we have played a part in that and trying to make sure that consumers are getting a safe product and are also getting what they're paying for. So I'll start with our ag products section. It's a section of one. We have one person that is handling the Food Safety and Modernization Act produce inspections. So anywhere from vegetables, fruit, things like that, they inspect that. Different specialty crops as well. And then they also do country origin of labeling inspections. So if you go to the grocery store and it says this is from Mexico, like there's actually inspections that go on behind the scenes, that we report to the federal government to make sure like consumers are actually getting products from where they think they are. The person in this position also handles, our maple regulations. So, we do inspect, maple for sale at retail locations, looking at the color, like making sure people are paying for a certain color, that's what they're getting, making sure there's not lead or mold in the maple. And so there's a lot of work that goes into that. But I can be a bit of a talker, so if you have questions, just interrupt me.
I have one quick question.
All right.
Representative Levitt.
Only 59% of maple passed inspection?
Mhm.
So what you do with the other 41%? You just had to trash it?
The biggest issue that we're finding, with inspections that are failing has to do with the color. The color can change if it sits for a while in its packaging. And so we've had discussions, with maple producers and others with, they should consider maybe marking it a different grade if they are holding on to it a while to make sure that it's not misgraded. But when that happens, it has to be pulled from the shelves. And then the maple producer needs to either address what it was listed at, but they're not allowed when we catch this to just keep selling it, and it's not what consumers are supposed to get. If it's a mold or a lead issue, that's not up for consumption. So.
Representative Rice.
But so the 59% is based on these 20 retail store inspections. So it's not,
It's not
the vast majority.
Yes, it's not the entire industry, but we are, we go to different places and trying to get different processors, different shapes and sizes to try to have it be equitable. We don't have a full-time maple position at the agency. So it's a limited scope of just how much we can get. But we have been working with the Maple Producer Association and others trying to address some of these issues.
Representative O'Brien.
And so that inspector also does whether it's Vermont maple syrup, right? Let's say there's a certain amount of additives from, say, Quebec coming in.
Yep, they also do, a lot of these get reported to us as consumer complaints, but the other thing that this inspector looks for is, when companies claim that there's real maple in their product, that there isn't. And Vermont's one of the few states that follows up with this, so we will follow up, with the AGO's office, because some of these are very large corporations, and informing them, like, you can't put maple on here unless it's actually pure maple syrup in it. And so we usually see, what, Dr. Haas, like maybe 2 of those a year sometimes.
Yeah, light driven.
Yep. And the companies, some of them have actually been fairly receptive to changing it. And so some of them actually have purchased Vermont maple syrup to then, be able to claim that it is maple. So that's another one of the many things that we follow up on.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
What 20, how do you determine what 20 stores to go to, and do you try to hit all the counties?
It's random throughout the state. We're not just focusing on one area. So it's like a random assessment, and we try to fluctuate each year where we go to, so we're not going to the same stores over and over. Yep.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Representative Lipsky.
To Josie's first question, these 20 stores that you perform inspections, they represent 2% of the maple production, 1% of the maple production?
That I don't know.
It's a tiny amount, given how much is wholesaled and shipped all over the world, I would think. It's a tiny amount.
It's a variety of brands, and some of the brands, they do multiple things. So some is in store for retail, some is at their sugar house, and then others is shipped out. We don't have statute authority to actually go into sugar houses and inspect those. That falls under USDA, and so it would fall under our health department and not us. Our regulations and statute is basically this scope and from this perspective of being able to inspect that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. So next up I have animal health, and animal health does a tremendous amount of work and both within our borders and outside of our borders. When you get into animal health and biosecurity, especially in New England, we have such small states. We want to work together to make sure animals coming in and out They have proper IDs. And so that if there was some sort of disease outbreak, we would be able to quickly assess where this came from, animals impacted, what needs to be quarantined and things like that. There's also a lot of work with federal partners and other state partners that comes into play for animal health with their work involving tracing animals and things like that. So we do license livestock dealers. You might have seen like a license plate going around, like people that are certified to do that. We do passive and active disease surveillance and different disease control. So we participate federally with basically working with like a drill of, let's pretend that these cows out of North Dakota had a blue tongue, and how do we like know where they are, and like kind of like mock exercises nationally. Things that used to take days to be able to track and figure out where these animals went, like if pretending this was a real life situation. It can be done exponentially quicker now, like down to hours or maybe even less depending. And so that is the work that's been done across all sorts of state agricultural agencies and federal partners. And Kristen, I don't know if you want to hit on any more of that or not.
Kristen Haas, Agency of Agriculture. I would just add, just to put some context that might be familiar, we all now are very familiar with contact tracing after COVID. This is contact tracing of animals, such that if we suffer from a foreign animal disease incursion or an emerging high consequence disease of high economic impact, we can as quickly as possible control that disease and lower the economic burden on Vermont producers and livestock dealers and others in the sector. So that's largely what a lot of this is based on, what the ultimate sort of goal or strategy is.
And so a big thing that has impacted animal health this year nationally, and there's been some cases in Vermont, is high pathogenic avian influenza. And it's our staff within animal health are trained to be able to handle biosecurity incidents, and some of our staff are pictured here. And nationally, it has not been a good year for poultry farmers, and the HPAI has predominantly been spreading through wildlife. And so like in Vermont, like we want our chickens outside on pasture and these things, but in having that, we also have a high risk because they will interact with other native birds and migratory birds and things like that. So we've had 2 incidents that were more domestic poultry, like backyard poultry individuals that were impacted, and the testing of both of these flocks, the virus strain, and Dr. Haas can speak better to this than me, did match strains that we have seen reported from the Department of Game and Wildlife and Fisheries, that it matched the same as what we've seen in some of the wildlife species that have been caught in Vermont with it. And I don't know if you want to elaborate at all the work you and your team have been doing with this.
I think you summed it up well. It's an ongoing issue, unlike in prior years when our country has dealt with HPAI, where it has an episodic kind of pattern to it, and in certain times of the years the risk dies down. With this particular outbreak, I mean, I'm looking at the website now, we're actually up to 58.1 million birds impacted, 311 commercial flocks and 432 backyard flocks. And so this just keeps rolling on. There's no downtime with this virus. It's so prolific in the environment and in the wild bird populations that the risk is perpetual. So our message to producers is consistently biosecurity and prevention. That's really the best thing that people can focus on to prevent a detection in a domestic flock in Vermont.
Yes, Representative Rice.
What does biosecurity and protection look like for pastured birds?
It's hard. It looks hard. I would say the big, as this outbreak has rolled on, the epidemiologists continue to evaluate the data that comes in and the risk profiles. And what has been determined so far is that even for outside birds, if those outside birds can still be have a line of separation between them and either the wild birds directly or indirectly. So for instance, if your birds are outside and you have a farm pond or a body of water where wild migratory birds may congregate, even just fencing off the area so that the domestic birds can't actually get into the pond and swim around with the wild birds. Things like that are very effective. Other strategies that people have used is to, if they're outside, maybe have some sort of cover or something to keep wild bird feces from dropping into the area. But it's hard. Nothing is exact. So what we focus on are strategies given an individual circumstance, strategies within that circumstance that can lower the risk. But you never get to zero, even with birds that are housed 100% of the time indoors, those birds are still getting infected. So it's never say never. It's hard. Requires constant diligence on the part of owners.
Representative Lipscomb.
With this avian influenza, these are naive questions, but I'm ignorant on this. Is there a vaccine or a medication that can save a bird that's infected, or do they get destroyed? How long does that? Anything you can tell me or us about it?
Sure. The high influenza strains are sort of in birds are similar to the same in people and other species. Some virus strains are very potent and cause death. Others are more mild and animals, and we, thank goodness, knocking on some wood somewhere, recover from them. And this particular sort of family of viruses, the highly pathogenic avian flu viruses, the mortality rate is very high, and if birds are infected, almost all of them die, and eventually that rate almost reaches 100%. So our control methods in that instance are to depopulate birds or flocks that are infected, partially to control the disease, but also, honestly, it's a humane care issue. Dying naturally from this disease is certainly not a humane way to go. So by humanely managing these flocks, we can ease a little bit of that burden. And then I would also say, to answer your vaccine question, there are vaccines available, but not commercially available. The issue with vaccination, and one of the things that drives these responses to these kinds of diseases, is that there are international trade implications. So as a country, one of the goals is to get back to, or as much as possible, preserve our export market. And if we as a country decide to vaccinate, then our return to being able to export is significantly longer. So there are economic impacts to that decision. So for that reason, those reasons, vaccines are not currently considered as part of the repertoire for management of this.
I think the hopeful goal, and it's been discussions like this with COVID, is that the current strain will evolve into a form that isn't so lethal for our poultry. So again, you don't really hear about animal health until things start dying that we don't want to be dying, and it's like, what's happening here, and let's try to get these things fixed. So our next section is meat inspection, which I'm sure you all have been hearing different things with slaughtering facilities and things like that, and the need for more. Meat inspection is it has the strictest regulations for food. When you have a slaughterhouse or a processor operating, a meat inspector has to be there, whether from the state or from the feds, depending on what the facility is, the entire time slaughtering is happening. And so these facilities can't actually operate without an inspector there. And so you'll see in the governor's budget request that's come through that we're asking for 2 more meat inspectors. And that is partly due to the increase in facilities that are processing or are slaughtering animals. So there is some growth out there. It takes a lot of investment to have these plants of different shapes and sizes. But as the industry grows, our meat inspectors have to grow with it. Just because of the demands of the job. And we don't want a situation where a processor wants to operate and we don't have coverage. We can't get someone there. We also fill in for USDA when they don't have inspectors at their facilities. So we have an equal to program. So our program at the state level is equal to USDA's. And that's part of what allows us to participate with them. Another thing that's listed up here is the Cooperative Interstate Shipment Program, the CIS. There's only 8 states in the nation, and we're one of them that has this program. And what it allows is for a state facility to not be under inspection by USDA. They can be under inspection with us, and they can ship their product and sell it out of state. So during COVID, we looked into this as more there was more desire and an uptick for processors and people wanting to sell their product out of state. We've implemented this and these businesses have had a lot of success. It's added a lot more work for our staff, but we're willing to do that to try to make these things work. There's a lot of farmers that are having trouble finding processors for them and when their animals are ready. And so we're happy that there are more facilities looking to come online, and we want to be able to serve those industries. So our next section, which is I feel like the most diverse and very unique, is weights and measures. And so they implement the National Institute of Standards and Technology for the state of Vermont. And it involves anywhere from, like as shown, making sure that this package of chicken is actually the listed amount is what's on the label, like making sure when consumers buy a pound of something that there's actually a pound in it, to the scales that you may see at a grocery store, to a concrete plant or a wood mill plant that's having truckloads of items coming in, making sure all of those things are weighed correctly, so consumers are getting what they pay for. When you go to a gas pump, you may see like a little gold sticker on it with a little hole punched in it. That's our inspectors making sure that the gas pumps are functioning correctly. So they also have different scales or weights that are brought to our lab. That's I believe Glenn Evans from the Ag Environmental Lab in Randolph spoke to you all, but we also have there the weights and measures lab, the metrology lab. And so people will send in their weights or other scales and things for us to check and whatnot. Weights and measures also test hydrometers. We're the only state lab in the country that does that, which is really critical for maple and making sure that when people are boiling that they're going to have the right consistency of the syrup and whatnot. You'll probably hear from Weights and Measures this legislative session on electric vehicle charging. There's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes on a national level that Vermont's been involved in and trying to have a standardization of these units and making sure that when it says, you know, you're getting charged this much per kilowatt, that it's actually giving that amount of kilowatts for someone. So similar to a gas pump, but just different. And so this is a new program for us in the governor's budget. There is for one employee for us to add in this section to be able to handle the electric vehicle charging, as well as a one-time allotment for being able to purchase the equipment to test for this. This is a very new program. It just started this calendar year nationally. And we've had some other states that were doing some trial runs and things like that we've been working with. Another thing is retail cannabis. And just because of the net weights and the product is known to dry. And so having to have accurate scales to make sure that shrinkage and other things aren't happening in this packaging and someone's spending a lot of money and they're not actually getting what they want. So
we've not had any consumer complaints yet, so that's great. But we do expect this coming in the future. We had one retail cannabis store reach out, and they're getting ready to open, and they said they were just using like a postal scale, like postal needle scale. And we're like, no. It's like not that. You need something a little bit better than that. So we're trying to work with that industry and help them along and educate them. So like there is a hierarchy of scales. So and then the dairy section, which is where I spend a lot of my time. We're a diverse group. We do a lot of regulations, both on the farm side for sanitation, the hauling of the milk, and then also on the plant side, the processing of it, and then the finished product going out to consumers. We do a tremendous amount of technical assistance with our staff. When we have people reach out and they say, I want to make butter, or I want to make yogurt, I want to make ice cream, but I don't know how. We teach people that are trying to invest in a business how to operate their facility, how to handle the milk and make these products in a safe manner. We adopt the federal pasteurized milk ordinance. It's the PMO, I call it the Dairy Bible. And it dictates the sanitation standards for any state that adopts that. To be able to sell your dairy product outside of your state, you have to at bare minimum meet these PMO standards. So a lot of the inspection work that we do is to make sure that our milk can leave Vermont, whether it's the raw milk that a farmer had on their farm and was picked up by a milk truck and it's going somewhere else in the Northeast to be processed, or it is finished product. So our obsession is, one, helping people get off the ground and being able to do things right the first time, and making sure that we maintain our standing with FDA so that our products can leave the state. And just a few FYIs to you all, that 84% of our products are consumed out of state. And so we are definitely an export state. Dairy makes up 70% of Vermont's agricultural sales, and we bring in $2.2 billion in economic activity to Vermont. So dairy takes up a big chunk of things. Just as a FYI, we are finishing up a strategic planning process that was implemented where a third of our staff retired in a very tight window. And we were able to bring people on and train them before their retirement so that we were not negatively impacting industry and that they were supported. And due to the decreasing trends that we're seeing on dairy farm numbers, we're currently cross-training our farm inspectors to be able to inspect processors. So we have in Vermont a lot of farmstead operations, which is where I milk my cows and I make cheese out of that milk. That's a farmstead. And so instead of having two different inspectors going there, we're working to train staff where the farm inspector could go inspect the plant while they're clean. And then when that's done, be able to go and inspect the farm. And that way it would be a little bit cost savings for taxpayers. And it helps us maintain the staffing levels that we have. Despite losing many dairy farms, the processor side, we can continue to see growth every year, even during COVID. And if that growth continues, I expect in the next 3 years that we may need an additional dairy plant inspector, even with the cross training that we're doing on this side. So, and when I presented this to Senate Ag, Senator Starr had asked for some, like, a little bit more in-depth dairy data. So I'll show that to you all just as like a FYI. The pounds processed in these brackets is in state statute, and that's how we license people. So that's just kind of how we track, like, these are milk processors in Vermont. And this is the amount of pounds is based on a day, how much they process in a day. So you'll see, like, our largest number of licensed individuals are more of the small farmstead operations. In Vermont, we have the most artisan cheese makers per capita in the nation. So we do have a lot of very successful small businesses. Some of them have like 6 goats, 2 or 3 cows, and they can make a living off of that, making their own products. And you go all the way to milk plants that can handle 1 to 2 million pounds of fluid milk a day and processing into a dairy product. So we have a lot of diversity there. And then to elaborate a little bit more on how much of our products are going out of state, Vermont supplies 63% of the fluid milk in New England. So we are the biggest maker of milk for the New England states. And so this is just a breakdown of 2020 pounds. It takes a while to get this data, which is why it's a few years old. And it's just kind of showing where this is milk that either went out of state to be processed or what we processed in state before it was either consumed in our state or exported out. You'll see a large line item for dumped milk. That was due to the COVID pandemic. And some processors either didn't have enough employees to process the milk, or there were other issues where it was just like the farmer still got paid for that, but it was dumped in their manure pit or other things. So luckily, we're not seeing that issue, and that trend has gone down. But also sometimes with trucking or freight, things can happen and the milk was on the truck too long, it got too warm and it's not fit to be processed. Those are some challenges that can happen. So, and then my last slide is a plug for our division's newsletter. It was definitely Dr. Haas's brainchild, and I can send you all links to it, but we try to do a quarterly newsletter that goes out via email. So I can send you all a link to, if you want to subscribe and know what we're up to, or other educational things that we're trying to just provide to a community. And then we also have listed on our website previous editions that we've done. So it's just a way to kind of track and for us to show the different things that we're doing that most people have no idea. They just go to the store and they get their milk, or they get their cheese or yogurt, and they move on with their life, and that's fine. We know our role, and we just want people to have a great experience when they are consuming whatever Vermont product that they're consuming. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative O'Brien.
How much do you partner with somebody like EVM Extension on maybe things that might affect one of, our sort of food markets? So an example, like I've often wondered if we talk about microplastics a lot in here, if microplastics potentially leach off maple sap pipelines and be in syrup. So, is that something you would get in touch with UVM, their maple researchers, and say, look into something like this?
It's something we can do. We've not asked yet. But I mean, that is something that can be looked into. I think one of the struggles is just that's a newer awareness in trying to figure out the different products. I know in the dairy world, that is something that we call them single-use containers. That's something that's being explored, and also the Dairy Business Innovation Center. I think Abby Willard probably gave you all some information on that with her group. But packaging is something that is being explored to have more innovation with that to try to avoid that. Yeah.
Representative Templeman.
Do you keep data available for us or for the public on raw milk outbreaks for tier 1 and tier 2 producers?
That would be with our health department.
Very
So
good.
we do regulate the raw milk producers, the tier 1, tier 2s, as you mentioned. But anything involving outbreaks or things like that, we would follow up and assist the health department with an investigation. But outbreaks and things like that, illnesses, that falls under the Department of Health.
Representative Rice.
How will the new origin of livestock rules sort of impact your work in the division at all?
Have at it, Kristen.
Kristen Haas, Agency of Agriculture. Can you repeat the question?
The origin of livestock rules that are coming out of the federal government, I'm just wondering how it impacts your
The
work.
ID requirements and all of that, yeah, it impacts us tremendously. In 2017, we worked with Mike O'Grady and this committee, your committee, to put it into statute, modernize some of the ID and interstate commerce language to make it comport a little more easily and more seamlessly with the federal language. But what is in process currently is USDA is working on updating their animal disease traceability rule. And that proposed rule just came out for public comment last week. Public comment period is open through mid-March, I think, March 20th perhaps. And so we'll be providing comment on that. But what that would do is shift the ID requirements from a visual official ear tag or other form of ID to a electronic only. And so that would have a significant impact on Vermonters. We have tens of thousands of electronic ID tags that we give out for free every year to Vermont producers, as well as the equipment to read those tags, to scan them. And so that's been great, but that won't last forever. Eventually, that will change, and it will be a fee-based, purchasing tags to be compliant. So I think in Vermont, there are some pieces of that rule that would work well for us. And then there are other classes of livestock where it may not make sense to spend the money to put an electronic ID, for instance, in a calf that's going to be slaughtered 2 days later or something of that nature. It's a different ball of wax to kind of play with. So we intend to provide feedback to USDA, letting them know kind of how our industry works. We're also seeing a lot of an uptick in the beef dairy cross animals, and so this new rule addresses categorization of those animals in a bit of an interesting way. So we'll be looking at all of that and providing comment to USDA. So it definitely impacts us because we have to, as Evie has mentioned in other contexts, we have to be consistent with the feds on those things. That answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So you said you provide readers now?
We have readers, yep, a limited supply, not enough for every Vermont farmer. So we have a system in place whereby if someone is interested in acquiring one of those readers, we ask them to provide to us not a formal business plan necessarily, but something to say, hey, this is how I intend to use this. This is how it can benefit me. This is the type of business I operate and why I think that this could be a valuable tool, just so we make sure that they're being put to good use since it's a limited resource.
So does like NOFA or both NOFA have readers? Or can they get readers?
The way that we currently are acquiring the readers is through a federal cooperative agreement, a grant agreement that we have. And so we use funding from that to acquire the readers with concurrence from USDA and then make those available to farmers. Certainly anyone can purchase readers, so NOFA as an organization or individual members could also purchase that equipment. It's just we've tried to make these things available to people and the way I think of it is to kind of prime the pump to get people able to use the materials and understand them and figure out how it fits best in their business environment, such that if, and I would say more likely when, this requirement is mandated, maybe we don't have to start from scratch as a state and people will already be somewhat familiar with it.
Can these readers be used by more than one farm?
Yes, they are, the way I think of it that might be more familiar because they've been around for longer. If you have a dog and you microchip your dog and you go to the vet and the vet scans the dog, or the dog gets picked up by animal control and scans the dog, that's how they find out that who the dog belongs to. So it's the same kind of technology. And so things have evolved now to the point where the electronic ear tags or other type of ID and the readers are more universally compatible. So there's nothing special about one farm's tags compared to another, and those readers can be shared from person to person or farm to farm, and that often happens.
I'll talk to you later.
Okay. I thought maybe that's where your mind is going, but yeah, they're available.
We started using those tags a while ago.
Yeah.
And then you have beef animals, not very easy to catch them.
No.
Or get close enough.
And these are nice because you can you don't have to be right up in their face around those heavy heads and horns and everything else to read a little tiny microscopic ear tag, so.
And when you get organic inspection, they want to read tags. They end up read them in.
Yeah.
Representative O'Brien?
Kristen, I think I heard, was there African swine flu in the US now?
Oh, goodness, no. African swine fever, is that what you're?
Yeah, swine fever, yeah.
Yes, no, we are forever though on the lookout for that. That's a disease. I would say that's, other than avian influenza, that's the current sort of hot topic thing to be aware of. So it's in the Dominican Republic and elsewhere, and we get reports, for instance, from Logan Airport and others, the Customs and Border Patrol and the agricultural inspectors, and it's amazing what they confiscate. And the thing with that disease and others is that it can be transmitted. You don't have to have a pig on the plane to come over that's infected. It can be transmitted through contaminated cured meat and other products. So it's a very resilient virus, and it's one we're definitely keeping a close eye on. But knock on wood,
It's not here.
known to be here yet. Yeah. If you hear that, please let me know.
Something else to be afraid of. Thanks, John.
Since I see increasingly the questions are being directed at Dr. Haas, I wonder if we should have you switch places unless there are
Okay, we go.
questions for EB. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Are there other questions I can answer, or what would be your preference, Chair?
Well, I wasn't, please have a seat.
Okay.
And wasn't sure if you had, did you have a presentation, a formal presentation, or?
No, I'm here, the transition within our division in leadership roles has happened relatively recently. So I have some institutional knowledge that goes way back for some of you who maybe had some way back in the past questions. But no, I've been here to support EB and then answer any specific animal health questions.
Okay.
So I do not have a formal presentation, and we'll let you off the hook on that front, at least with me.
Questions, other questions?
This actually is kind of free.
Yeah, that's fine.
Did I hear correctly that you're head of the division now also and you are dairy section chief? Is that the plan moving forward? Is that?
We don't get to have just one job in the agency of agriculture.
Yeah.
It's, we have limited resources, and so Dr. Haas was our original director, and we had all sorts of discussions as a division on transition plans within our section, and then Dr. Haas realized that there wasn't one within our own leadership, and her position as director and our state veterinarian, it was too much work for one person to do and not enough to get everything done. And so we used to have just one director and one deputy director. Now there's one director, which I took that position, and there's two deputy directors. So Dr. Haas is one of the deputy directors, and Dr. Kathy McNamara, she's more involved on the meat inspection side. And so we did that to try to spread the workload to make our jobs a little bit more doable. And then I've had staff that has stepped in to take on some of the data and other management and things I was doing within dairy. So still getting education from Dr. Haas, and I'm very happy about that. We made the transition late fall, Kristen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
So it's still pretty new.
Still new. We're still tag teaming a lot of things, which is nice. I hope. It's nice for me anyway.
It's nice for me.
Yes.
Not so much a question, but I know you've been a witness in the past on the humane treatment of animals comes into your division. If anybody else here had something on that, because like livestock, adequate shelter, even pets, right?
Yes, so that I actually am aware, and that there was a report, we've called it the Act 147 report from the last legislative session that was drafted by the Department of Public Safety. That was actually just submitted this morning on that very topic, and it evaluates possible ways of improving and streamlining and making more efficient and more user-friendly the structure that's in place in Vermont for managing animal welfare-related activities. Currently, the Agency of Agriculture's responsibility in that realm is to license. We do administrative licensing for pet shops and other similar brick and mortar locations. And then we also are statutorily obligated or allowed or vested with the authority to consult with humane officers if there's a livestock or poultry animal welfare concern. We do not investigate those concerns or enforce, but we provide technical assistance and consult to those who do. Right now, it's the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the game wardens, that are doing a lot of that investigatory and enforcement work. And so we've been supporting them quite a bit lately.
Yes, okay.
Dr. Haas, I know it's not it's under agriculture, but do you deal with equine issues or welfare?
Yes.
As well.
Yes, we do. So that's a great question, because many times, depending on how people are using their horses, they don't necessarily consider them livestock in the traditional sense, because they're recreational animals perhaps, but in the statutory definitions, horses are included under the definition of livestock. So anytime we talk about those livestock programs, horses are lumped into that bucket for their benefit or not. I think mostly I think it's an appropriate way to consider them, because they have many of the same needs and limitations as far as some of the welfare attributes, sheltering, feeding, adequate nutrition, and use and that kind of thing.
Bees are livestock too, right?
Bees are.
And they have.
Bees.
I learned that. I was like, what?
Yeah, production animals.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have waiting very patiently.
Yes.
Been Steve Winnell, am I pronouncing this correctly?
We stretch for a second.
Sure,
I got it.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Dave.
We stretch for 2 minutes or 3 minutes?
Yes,
Or we just stretch in the room. Let's just do a little.
I was gonna suggest that maybe, if, depending on how long you,
We don't have a PowerPoint, so we're just going to present some general information, then answer questions.
okay. Folks, feel free to get up and stretch. You can certainly stand, and we'll go ahead and hear from you then.
Okay, okay.
Chris, please. Chris, yes, please.
Well, good afternoon.
Yeah.
Representatives. My name is Stephen Dwinell. I'm the Director of the Public Health and Agricultural Resource Management Division within the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. And
I'm Stephanie Smith. I'm the Deputy Director of the Public Health and Ag Resource Management Division. And I have a colleague, Dave Huber, who's not here with us today, who's a deputy, similar to the structure that was described by Consumer Protection. So two deputies.
Right. Yeah, Dave couldn't be here today, but and of course, anything we talk about today, if you want additional information or follow-up questions, we can always get back to you however you want that information. But just to give you a little context, I guess, just about who I am. So, since I'm new to the state, you may be familiar with Kerry Jagir. He was the director. He moved over to the Cannabis Control Commission in the fall. I was, I'm an entomologist. Specialize in integrated pest management in agricultural instructional pest management. For 30 years, worked for the Florida Department of Agriculture, more or less the same capacity as this position in terms of regulating pesticides, feed, seed, fertilizer, mosquito control, and pest control. So, very happy to be able to work here. I actually my wife and I decided to move to Vermont last year. And we moved in July, bought a house, moved up here, and I was working in private industry. And then Kerry called me and said, "Hey, I'm moving. Would you be interested in this position?" And that was an easy answer. So
I was wondering how we got somebody to move to Vermont and find a place to live.
Well, we were able to do. We've been trying to get up here for about 5 years, and we finally were able to pull it off. So we're extremely happy. We live in Orwell. So in a 220-year-old house, so we're having lots of fun. But anyway, so a lot of experience in this area, but obviously I have a lot to learn about Vermont. Vermont agriculture and the way things are done here is obviously very different than Florida agriculture, or anything in the Southeast. But our division is a small division. We only have 19 FTEs. We have 7 most of the time, I guess, 7 seasonal, it varies. But we're responsible for 13 different statutes and the associated rules. So we cover everything. Well, we have feed, seed, fertilizer, and pesticides are the main agricultural inputs. But also we regulate structural pest control, we regulate mosquito control, we regulate apiary, so the livestock we were just talking about, we regulate that industry and support that industry. We also do plant nurseries and then have responsibilities for protecting the state from invasive exotic species, plants and insects, especially ones that could affect agriculture. We also had the hemp program, which Stephanie can tell you about, but we also licensed ginseng dealers. Collectors and dealers. And just within, and Stephanie will talk more about this, I guess just within the last year, we're given some responsibilities for on-farm food residue management.
Yeah, import of food residuals to farms that use that for an agricultural input into their operations. So the food residuals are, plate scraping and other food products that might come from a grocery store or other institution prior to being consumed. So both pre and post consumer food waste.
Right, which is obviously part of the whole issue of waste management in the state. And some of the emerging issues with PFAS and PFOS and all that. But just a couple of highlights. I don't have a PowerPoint, so I can't get into a lot of the numbers. We can always get that information too. But some of the big things going on, we just were able to amend the Vermont rule for control of pesticides. It was last adopted in 1991. We just LCAR approved it on January 19th, an update of that rule. So that rule now is going to be going into effect probably in early February. And that has a lot of changes in the way pesticides are regulated in the state. A lot of provisions were modernized and brought up to speed, made consistent with some changes by the US EPA in how pesticide applicators are certified. And that was the bulk of the rule change, but there were some other things too involving the way we review and approve permits for some pest control activities. And the way we classify some pesticides as class A, B, and C pesticides within the state. The other big thing that we've been spending a lot of time on is the Agricultural Innovation Board, which was established by the legislature. It came into existence in 2022, beginning of 2022. And so we've been getting that board up to speed. It's an appointed board, volunteers, representatives from industry, from the agricultural industry and from other state agencies. And it has a number of responsibilities, which we can go into. There's quite a few of them, but the sort of the two big ones right on the that we're dealing with right now has to do with the best management practices and rules regarding the use of treated seed. And I'm sure y'all are familiar with the concerns about the use of neonicotinoid treated seeds and pollinators. And so the legislature gave this board the responsibility to propose some evaluate and propose best management practices for the use of those seeds. And we have a deadline of March of 2024 to make a presentation on that. So that's what the board's going to be focusing on for this year. We have a report that we've already provided. Our first annual report was provided to the legislature on January 13th. That's up on the legislative report website. And then we have another report that's due by February 15th, next month, on recommended best management practices for non-neonicotinoid treated seeds. So the seeds that are treated with other materials. And so we've got that. The board, we just had a meeting on Monday, on 23rd, and the board elected not to recommend any BMPs for the non-neonicotinoid treated seeds, because the BMPs that we were looking at were very generic. A lot of that information is already out there in the industry. It's provided by seed associations, provided by crop associations. And the fact that we're going to be, developing and recommending some BMPs for the neonicotinoid treated seeds within a year. It was just, everyone felt it was just too confusing.
BMPs, can you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Best management practices.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. That's jargon. But yeah, so rather than, propose a set and go through the process of getting all those promulgated and everything, and then come back a year later with another set, just didn't seem to make a lot of sense. Plus, there's a lot of information that we're missing on seed, which Stephanie can talk about. And then the other thing that we're going to be wrestling with at some point after we deal with the issue of the best management practice for neonicotinoid treated seeds is some solutions for agricultural plastics use. That was one of the things that they were charged with looking at. There's we had several issues pop up just recently on that. And then just some of the other things. So those are sort of the big things that we are working to, another legislative charge we have is to develop a pollinator health management assessment, I guess you'd call it. The legislative term was benchmark, but what that really means is get the information about what's happening with pollinator health and particularly managed pollinators, bees. And so we have folks in our division who are working on developing a way to do that, to get information. I mean, we track the number of colonies in the state and the number of apiaries and all that, but the question is, how are the bees doing? What are they, because one of the things we hear from the beekeepers is, yes, they have the number of hives, but they're harder to maintain. The bees don't seem as healthy. It's more difficult to maintain the hives in a healthy condition to, be economically successful. That's one of the things we want to get a handle on to see what's happening. Of course, the big problem with bees is the parasite varroa mite is what's really affecting their health right now. The mite itself is a problem, plus the mite transmit a number of diseases. And so managing the varroa mite in honeybee colonies is a real big issue. And that we're working with the industry on that. An area I'm personally very interested in is the mosquito control programs in the state. I have a lot of experience with mosquito control in Florida. And so I'm going to be meeting with there are 2 districts in the state. I'll be meeting with both of them in the next month to go over their operations and see how they're doing and see what we can do to support them. So anyway, That's what I was going to talk about.
Yeah, and I was going to dig in a little bit more about some of the programs that I have the most familiarity with. So similar to food safety and consumer protection, the Public Health and Ag Resource Management Division does a little consumer protection as well. We register products, feed, seed, feed, seed, and fertilizer products, as well as pesticides. Pesticides we evaluate per EPA regulations, and we register those products. There's approximately 12,000 products that have been registered in 2022 to give you a gauge of the type of, the number of products that we register for pesticide purposes. The largest category of registration are feed products. We register over 16,000 products annually. Many of these are renewals. But recently, the legislature gave us the authority to begin to register dosage form animal health products, which are those products that improve the function of an animal. It's not a drug, but it helps them maybe move better. Common products that I've seen, I've done an inspection in the field once, but with one of my colleagues at the agency are potentially CBD products that would also be classified as a dosage form animal health product. And so we're registering those products as well. And we also register fertilizer products. We have over 10,000 of those that are registered in the state of Vermont. And what we do is we do test feed and fertilizer products to determine whether or not the feed product contains the nutritional elements that are on the label. And if they don't, we have a progressive discipline process, as well as penalties that are associated with those products. So a little consumer protection, want to ensure that the consumer is purchasing a product and it meets the label guarantees. Likewise for fertilizer, the sampling agents go out, the field agents go out and sample fertilizers. They take fertilizers off the shelf. For those that are in brick and mortar stores, as well as those that are mixed, custom blended for farmers. Likewise, there are penalties associated with those fertilizer products that don't meet the nutrient guarantees that are on the label. If we were requested, the agency's requested by a farmer to go and take that sample, then the penalties that are assessed actually go to the farmer. If we don't know who, if we just pull a product off the shelf and there's not necessarily a direct consumer impact, then those fees come to the agency. So that's part of what we do. We have a fertilizer and a feed report we're about to load on our website, probably this Monday. I'm looking at Steve anyway.
Sounds good to me.
On Monday. And it has information about the last 2 years of sampling that was taken, and the Vermont Ag Lab does the testing for us, and it shows what's, pass fails or what was within tolerance. And was okay, passed by being within the tolerance. And so that information will be available on Monday on our website. As Steve mentioned, we have the food residual program. We talked a little bit about that. Just as an update, we also issued a legislative report on that. That's available on your website. We are required annually to provide this report. As we know, currently there are approximately 15 farms that are known to accept food residuals. We're finding that some that had accepted food residuals in the past for the purposes of agriculture are potentially stepping out. And we're seeing new smaller farms step in and building kind of like decentralized community-based food recovery and recycling efforts. So we were required to have rules in place by January of 2021. We still do not have rules in place, I will admit. However, the agency is doing a tremendous amount of outreach. We've participated in at least 2 stakeholder groups that have devised guidance to provide to farmers who want to engage in this practice. We are currently doing site visits to understand what the needs are of the farmers that are engaged in this practice. So we can, what's possible, what's reasonably possible for us to ensure that time and temperature is met, that pathogens are killed, that the food waste that comes onto the farm is free of physical and chemical contaminants, with the population that we're working with, which is generally really small farmers. So we're doing that research. We feel it is a responsible way of going through a rule-making process. So I just wanted to say we don't have rules in place. I'm going to own it. The other, we participated in at least 2 outreach events, and we recently hired an individual to help do this work at the agency in September, I believe. So fairly recently, that individual's been out on the farm, on many farms, doing many site visits, again, understanding what reasonable kinds of regulations can be put in place that also protects the consumer and controls nuisance in some instances. So let's see here. The hemp program, 2023, we've turned over the hemp program to the United States Department of Agriculture. And the USDA registers individuals that are interested in cultivating hemp only. They do not regulate processing of hemp. They do not regulate hemp products. And so we've turned over that growing portion to USDA. The Cannabis Control Board was given some authority to regulate products on the hemp side. I believe they may have issued a report or in the process of putting together rules. I will let them speak to what they're doing relative to hemp products, if you so wish to invite them in. But we're no longer doing that. So I just wanted to update folks on that. As of a look at the USDA's website, 2 weeks ago, we had 3 farmers that were registered with USDA. Actually, I just left a message for another one, so I have at least knowledge of a 4th. But we believe it was a responsible decision to have USDA and be the primary regulatory authority over hemp crops in the state of Vermont. To some extent, there are some there's no cost at this point in time to register or obtain a license from USDA. Their licenses are good for 3 years. Ours were annual. And all of the standards are the same. The agency, if we were the regulatory authority and received delegation of that regulation from USDA, it would be to the same standard that USDA regulates. We ceded our authority back to USDA. Farmers will be able to use any lab in the United States that they wish for the potency test to prove that that hemp is actually a hemp crop. Whereas under the agency's regulation, we would have required them to use a lab that's located in the state of Vermont. So However, our lab certification program was a great program, and we ensured that folks that were testing hemp were testing it to the same standard. So, but anyway, it opens it up. It opens up the market for those hemp growers that they can use any lab. There's no cost, 3 years. I'm just giving some highlights. And then again, same standards. So as Steve mentioned, we have the nursery program where we inspect nurseries for insects and other invasive pests or invasive plant species, and regulate to ensure that those aren't being either spread or sold in the nursery trade. We also work very closely with USDA for the cooperative agricultural pest survey. So we survey for pests with money from USDA. We work closely with the Pest Protection Quarantine Division of USDA, PPQ. And we also inspect Christmas trees for export. We issue phytosanitary certificates for export of plants across other locations into other states. And yeah, that's primarily, lots of digging in.
Representative Levitt.
I know, yeah. I'm sorry, I wasn't sure.
No, it's okay. No, I have to be acknowledged and you were on a roll. I want to talk about invasives for a second.
Sure.
Sort of the flip side of that is when I go to a nursery and it says it's a Vermont native and it isn't, which has been happening a lot to me and my partner, what recourse, not that I want to get anyone in trouble, but they're selling things that are saying Vermont native and it's not actually a native plant to
Plant to
Vermont.
the state of Vermont.
No.
Don't know if we have labeling requirements for nursery plants.
Okay.
I do know that there is interest, so there's native plants to the Northeast, let's say, then there's also I've heard there's interest in native plants being that the exact type of plant is native to the state of Vermont. It was not only just grown in the state of Vermont, but its genetic makeup is from Vermont.
That would be my partner.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, we don't currently regulate that. And that's, but it could be seen as a marketing tool as well, which goes to the label requirements.
Right. It's certainly worth looking into. I mean, that's a concern because it is a concern for consumer protection, obviously, but also to stop the spread of exotics in the state if they're mislabeling material. So I tell you what, if you could give us some examples, we can certainly take a look at it.
Yeah.
See what.
And is there a definition from you guys of what constitutes native, or is it just what constitutes an invasive?
Yeah, we only have on the invasive side. I don't think we have a definition for what's native.
Okay.
It's also could just be an education thing. We do have, we meet with the Vermont, was it the Native Landscape?
The Vermont Nursery and Landscape Association, the VNLA.
It's worth talking to them about it.
Yeah. They have an annual conference coming up.
Yeah, we do.
February.
Right.
February is coming so quick.
Vermont Nursery and what? What was the rest?
Landscape Association.
Yep.
Representative Tuffman.
So I have a question, but it's based on an assumption. So you may blow away my assumption and then the question won't be answered. The assumption is that biocides, some of the formulations or majority of the formulations are trade secrets and proprietary.
Yeah.
And then based on that, how do you go into examining and testing when you don't know what you're working with?
Okay, that's an excellent question. So for pesticides, which is what I think we're talking about, for a pesticide to be sold in the United States, it has to be registered with the US EPA. When they register it with the US EPA, they have to provide what's called a confidential statement of formula, which has everything in it. They can't, it's not it's a secret from other industries, but it's not a secret to EPA. We don't review that now. We don't have the resources to review it. Other states do. Larger organizations. I'm sure New York State does, for example. But the confidential statement of formula is reviewed as part of the registration process. Okay, and this happens occasionally when a material that's used in a formulation gets identified as being a problem for toxicity or for environmental reasons, like EPA will require them to pull it out. And that just happened with some of the PFAs, I believe, you know, and all that's always published on EPA's website, and we have access to that. We also get involved with EPA on a regular basis through a couple of organizations, the American Association of Pesticide Control Officials, and there's a formal mechanism called SFIREG, which is it's a long acronym, but basically it's a way for the state lead agencies to interact with EPA at a regional level and at a national level. And I've got a lot of experience. I did that for years. I was the chair of SFIREG for 4 years, so very familiar with how EPA does everything. But all that is looked at. So anytime something pops up, and if there's a concern about a particular product, we can always, you know, we can get information about it. We can drill down and get it. For most products, and I'm not saying this happens every time, but for most products, the materials that are used in the confidential statement of formula are pretty generic materials. There's been historically, pesticide formulations were made with a lot of solvents, organic, you know, chlorinated solvents. They've pretty much gotten away from that. Most of the inert ingredients these days are things like clay and, you know, silica, and they're just carrying agents. But I mean, if there's a concern about any particular product, we can always drill down and find out what it is in terms of what's actually in it. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, but yeah, we can find out what's in it for sure if we need.
Representative Rice?
Yeah, it's interesting to me that pollinators and bees, or I'm sorry, the pesticides and bees both sort of fall under your jurisdiction.
Yep.
I understand that the bee piece is apiaries, bees as livestock mostly, right? But so the elephant in the room there is native pollinator populations. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to sort of how native pollinators come into your thinking on pesticides and mosquito control.
Right,
also.
and just a little background, like I said, I'm an entomologist, and actually when I was in grad school, that's one of the things I worked on was native pollinators. That was one of my areas of interest. I didn't get the PhD, so I can't claim that, but I did start working on it. But the point is, so when you talk about native pollinators, pretty much, I mean, it's actually easier to identify the insects that are not pollinators than the ones that are, because insects co-evolved with flowers, and so they pretty much all have some role in pollination. The question on everyone's mind is are things we're doing now affecting native pollinators to the extent that it's going to cause a long-term problem? And the short answer is we don't know. Okay, there's evidence that, you know, insecticides kill pollinators. That's not a surprising thing. The question is, are the insecticides we're using, the way we're using them at the levels we're using them, causing a problem with the native pollinator population in the state of Vermont? We don't know. I mean, there have been some surveys of native bee populations that have shown declines in native bees, but what does that mean? I mean, so there are lots of things that can affect a pollinator population, habitat change, climate change. Any agricultural system is an artificial ecosystem, so it's always going to have an impact on a native pollinator. Even organic agriculture is an artificial ecosystem, and it's going to have an impact on that. So the question is, what's really going on, and is it at a level that we need to change the way we're performing agriculture? That's the question, you know, because our responsibility is to regulate the pesticides, right? And we don't want to allow the use of pesticides that are causing environmental problems, obviously. We have the tools and the mechanisms for either, you know, restricting their use or modifying the way they're used so that doesn't happen. One of the things we're looking at internally right now is a native pollinator survey to figure out how we can answer that question. I mean, all the studies I've seen are of limited scope, okay, and limited duration, and they'll show an effect or they won't show an effect, but it doesn't really answer the question in my mind about what's really going on. And is it at a level that we need to change, you know, because if we make a change in the way we're doing agriculture, that has ramifications. I mean, you just talked before we came here about how, you know, we're having an issue with organic dairies that's affecting the economy and affecting the, you know, so all these things have ramifications. So we have to look at everything and get as much information as we can before we make a decision along those lines.
What kind of duration would in your opinion, would a study have to be?
That I don't know. It would have to be several years because you have to always rule out climactic effects. And that's what we're wrestling with. How do you design a study like that? And how do you perform a study like that?
Particularly with the continued use of pesticides.
Well, but you can always compare areas where they're used and areas where they're not used. I mean, that would be a fairly simple thing to do, actually. The trick is going to be to rule out all the other factors that could potentially affect it. There are a lot of insect populations that we don't understand the population dynamics of. So, because they change from year to year, maybe that's just what they normally do. We don't know that. So there are a lot of questions to be answered. And it is something that we've been talking about internally is how can we answer that question? Because it is a legitimate question that needs to be answered. But the one point I'd make, or two things I guess I'd leave you with. One is that there are a lot of insect pollinators. Okay, we're not just talking about bees. There's just tens of thousands of species of insects that pollinate plants as part of their life cycle. Okay, so that's one element. And the second is that anytime we do anything in agriculture, it's an artificial ecosystem. So you've got those two things that you've got to keep in mind. There's not. Well, anyway, those are the two things you have to keep in mind when you're asking that question and then trying to get a good answer to it.
The mosquito control piece.
Okay.
Just wondering how,
Well, okay, so mosquito control, did mosquito control in Florida for a long time. And Florida, of course, has got some of the biggest and most sophisticated mosquito control programs in the world, really, because of the nature of the situation there. Mosquitoes, there are two things you have to worry about with mosquitoes. One is, so there are mosquitoes that transmit diseases, and you have public health impacts, and then you have mosquitoes that are pests. And they're pests when they affect humans and animals, either prevent economic activity, impact quality of life. I mean, high populations of mosquitoes can actually impact bird populations because that's where mosquitoes get most of their blood is from birds. We just happen to get in the way once in a while, but it's really a mosquito bird thing that's been going on for millions of years. So the question is, do you have a population of a particular species of mosquitoes in a particular area that is at a level that it's having an impact on the people that live there or the wildlife that lives there, and then what do you do about it? And there's a lot to it. There are a lot of things you can do. And mosquito control districts that are functioning in the best way, they spend most of their time monitoring the population as opposed to treating. Most of their budget is spent on monitoring the population and identifying what species are occurring where, and then making a strategic decision at certain points to interrupt that population, knock the population down. If that answers your question.
Yeah.
Well, I'd be glad to talk to you about it outside the meeting too. I mean,
I mostly meant how do the native pollinating insects?
Work with mosquitoes. I'm sorry, I went off on a tangent there. No, well, mosquitoes perform pollination services too. Services. I mean, they pollinate plants too. The adult mosquitoes, the males and the females both visit flowers, and so they perform. They do pollination. The thing about mosquitoes, though, is they are adapted to rapidly increase their population when the environmental conditions are just right. So it's not like they have a sort of a stable population. Their population goes like this all the time. That's what they do. And they overwhelm any possible predator by that rapid increase. And that's their reproductive strategies. They're relatively rare, and then all of a sudden they're everywhere. And then they go back again. And that way they don't ever, so in terms of, do they actually impact success of plants? That's kind of an open question. Maybe in some areas they do, but their population is so variable. You could probably spend some time trying to figure that one out.
I'm going to give Representative Templeman the last question. Well, two more questions. And then I want to make sure that the committee has a chance to take an actual break because we haven't, and we got to get right back at it at 3. So Dave,
On the tail end of this, so the data is still out on
Pollinators.
on pollinators,
Right.
on the impact
Right.
of pesticides on pollinators.
Right.
But the position is because of economic impacts, we should be permissive until the data is back. Am I reading that right? They're my words, not yours.
Yeah, I mean, the other way to look at that is it justified to take an action now when we don't know?
Well, the action is applying pesticides,
Right.
not the action being not applying
Okay,
pesticides.
so you can always do the best you can with how you use the pesticides to minimize any impact, which is what we've done actually with the new rules.
But you can't do that with the data that you don't have.
Well, but you can, you know that insecticides will impact insects. So you want to use the insecticide in a way that'll have the minimum impact
I see.
on non-target species. That's just a general principle. So you design the way you use the pesticide so you have the minimum impact on. I apologize if I gave the impression that, hey, well, we don't know, so we're just going to, do whatever we want to do.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. We have pollinator protection provisions built into the rule we just adopted. There are pollinator protection provisions built into the pesticide labels for those products that have been identified as being extremely toxic to bees in particular. But if they're extremely toxic to bees, they're probably extremely toxic to other pollinators too. And then in the event that we find out, even without getting all the great data and not even able to ask the question, if we know that a particular product is causing a particular problem, we can always do something about it. You can restrict the use, you can prohibit its use. In my career, very rarely have we had to actually flat out prohibit the use. We've been pretty successful in modifying the use in such a way that we eliminate the risk. The timing, the rate, the use site, that kind of thing. There's a whole menu of tools you can use when you're talking about a crop protection product that you may be able to allow it to get the benefit from it without causing a problem. But that all depends on, a lot of information. Yeah. And, So, but yeah, we have the tools to do what we need to do. The question is, you have to make as best decision as you can with the information you have. So.
Representative Lipsey.
I'll make this quick. You're an entomologist?
Yes, sir.
Ticks, we haven't talked about.
Oh.
Ticks, do they come under?
Yeah, well, we do a tick survey. That's one of the things that our division does.
Come to my house.
We're all really anxious to get out of here, but public health
Right.
and ticks are a real crisis, have been for
Yep.
centuries, but
Yep.
they're migrating north.
Yeah.
With climate changes, so maybe I don't want.
But we do a tick surveillance, and we could, if the committee would like, we can come in and do a presentation just on that.
I don't know that it's relevant to agriculture, but for public health.
Well, that information's available. We can provide you our annual tick report,
Thank you.
That'd be nice.
Excellent question and right up your alley, it seems like with your academic background and the work that you do. And I'm sorry, I am a little bit torn here, but I think this is fascinating, and we will have you back. Not to talk about ticks, about pollinators or something. I'm certain of it. So thank you for all four of you for the testimony and introduction today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Is Patty Casey still the tick expert?
Yes.
Where is she in your division?
Yeah, actually, she also does.